This happened a few years ago when a friend and I shared a duplex. These were owned by individual people instead of a company, so there were less people around, less staff to monitor us, and we were pretty much left to ourselves. There were a few other surrounding duplexes to our sides and real nice looking houses across from us. Some of the duplexes looked okay, like ours. Some of the others weren't as nice and taken care of. And the same went with some of the tenants. Some of them were good people, some kept to themselves, and some you tried to avoid eye contact. Thankfully, our neighbor of the attached duplex was one of the good ones. Well, at least half of them. It was an older woman, Ruby, that lived there. When we first moved in, she seemed very spry and outdoorsy too. That's part of the reason why Jess got so involved in gardening too. She was always outside planting, watering, and de-weeding her garden bed, cleaning her patio furniture, etc. She'd make too many sweets or snacks and always brings us extra, things like that. We didn't mind at all, and otherwise, she kept to herself and we kept to ours. There was no snooping around, asking questions, and getting in each other's business either, so she was pretty much the perfect neighbor. However, Ruby had a son, Marco, that was less than welcoming, and we didn't care to see him around. He would randomly show up, and when she wasn't home, he could just be standing outside for hours until she showed up. The first time we saw him, he was sitting on her steps in a hoodie and jeans, falling asleep. We did have a security camera set up, so after about an hour of him sitting there, I almost went to ask him who he was waiting for when I noticed Ruby pull in. I watched through their window just to make sure because I didn't want her to be harassed or something worse if this was a stranger. I saw the smile on her face fade to more of a fake grin when she saw him sitting there and they started talking. She then let him in, and from there I assumed she knew who the person was and let it go. Marco would randomly show up at times and could be there for a few hours, and then someone would come pick him up, or it would appear like he would stay there overnight a few times. We were finally introduced one time when we were out front smoking and he asked for a cigarette. Ruby came out shortly after and told us he was her son and was visiting for a while. We were polite, but the guy definitely didn't seem like he was all there. He typically looked exhausted all the time. It started to become a normal thing when he was around. As soon as we were outside, he was asking us for a smoke, and he was over there maybe once a week. Then for a while, it became less frequent. Maybe a few days a month. Then after not seeing him for 2 or 3 months, he showed back up again, sitting on the porch with a backpack and a box. It would turn out that he would move in with Ruby. Great. She didn't look too thrilled about it either. As I started to hear them talk outside on the back patio, she would ask about his plans, and he would get irritated and say things like, he didn't know, he didn't have any, don't worry about me, etc. One time, late at night, after he bummed another smoke from us, he asked where he could go to get cheap beer without being carded. We told him we didn't really know, and just told him about a local liquor store. He then proceeded to walk off down the street, and as we finished our cigarette, Ruby came out and apologized for her son. She said he had been down on his luck, and she was trying to get him back on his feet, and appreciated us being patient with him around. She tried to offer us money for the cigarettes he kept taking, but we always refused. Sadly, they would begin arguing more. You could hear them fighting outside, then you could hear them fighting inside. You could hear the door slamming as he left, and him banging on the door to be let back in when he forgot his key. Ruby had already started to shut herself in more. We hardly saw her go outside anymore, and I noticed on the camera that she'd go out real early in the morning in her robe to water her plants and then quickly go back in. I think she had like a book club or Bible club every Wednesday night, and a few other ladies would be over at her place, and that stopped too. I felt bad, but there wasn't really anything we could do but just hope that he would leave soon. That would soon come to fruition when he gets kicked out. They were arguing again after someone else, equally shady, showed up at her place. Marco went outside and brazenly, with the camera right on them, made a drug deal. I now understood why Ruby had been so upset. I can't imagine it was for her or that she used at all. I shamefully went out back to listen to the fight when I heard it, and she mentioned he was there for a new start, to kick it, and to get his own place. She complained that he was using again, and that he hadn't found a job or even had proof he was looking. She said she didn't want that stuff around her in her place and didn't want his friends to know where she lived, so she told him to leave. I know we, for one, were thankful. He slammed the front door and started walking down the street again. I kept checking the cameras a few times to see if he would ever return, but he never did, and he wouldn't the next night either. However, it wouldn't be a simple move out by any means. I'm a heavy sleeper, so a few hours into my slumber, I'm awoken to Jess banging on my door. As I went to open it, I noticed the smell of smoke. That was the reason for her waking me up. We started looking around, making sure nothing was on fire, and trying to find out where the smoke was coming from when we started hearing smoke alarms going off from Ruby's side. We quickly grabbed our phones and ran outside. Jess started calling 911, and I just remember frantically beating on her door to try and wake her up, but she never answered. This is where I regretted never swapping phone numbers with her. When the fire truck showed up, we told them that we thought Ruby was still inside and went to the end of our driveway to wait to see what happened. Unfortunately, Ruby was still inside, but they were able to get her out, barely alive. Not only was she in there, but she didn't answer because she had been beaten on the back of her head, causing her to pass out on the living room floor. Of course, the fire was intentionally set as well, and we had a feeling we knew by who. Thankfully, we didn't have to point the finger as we learned Ruby identified Marco as the one that did it. Jess ended up helping her out a lot when she was at the hospital and told her what had happened. She locked Marco out, so he ended up breaking in through the back door. They had gotten into a fight when he hit her in the back of the head, and the next thing she knew, she was at the hospital. But don't worry, she talked to him when he got arrested, and he admitted he was high when this took place, but thought only his mom's side would burn down and was sorry for hurting us. Charmer, right? She had damage in the living room, and they had to repair the wall separating our units, so we both got put into a hotel for a while. Jess still keeps in touch with Ruby and tells me how she's doing, but I don't care for attached units anymore and moved into my own place as soon as I could.